Welcome back to another episode of the Sports Card Dad. I'm excited. I'm always excited. I've got my buddy Alex, the president of Hakes Auctions, is back here to talk again about the March auction that is going on at Hakes. We're going to be hunting for treasure, but also this is going to be fun too because we're going to talk a little bit about, Alex, your background, your collecting background, and that sort of thing. Man, how are you? I haven't talked to you in a few weeks.
Wonderful. Again, thanks for having me back. Always a pleasure to be here. Good. Just, crazy busy. We covered the January Jeff Jacob action figure auction.
So as a child, in my toy box of toys that I had as a kid was many Star Wars action figures, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundercats, so many of the 80s toy lines that were absolutely a huge part of my childhood. So as an adult collector, in the toy lines that I've collected as an adult since 1994 to present, started off with Star Wars. After that, I started collecting other toy lines such as G.I. Joe and Thundercats and He-Man. I mean, there are so many different toy lines that we've collected now, that I collect now. But primarily, it's always been Star Wars is my number one.
That went right into a February online exclusive auction, which went right into what is now the March cataloged auction. So it's been, 3 months in a row of auction madness. It's been good, been exciting. Lots of great prices, including especially Jeff Jacob. So all in all, good, just busy.
Yeah, I was watching closely on some of the Jeff Jacob stuff just to see, and I watched probably 30 items or something. I had a bunch of items on my watch list just to pay attention to what was going on. I was thinking, man, I'll try and see if I can grab one of these. And man, there were so many items that I felt like they went way above projections, just because a lot of these they haven't ever even been to market. Yeah, I mean, it was really cool to see that, because a lot of these auctions, whether it be sports cards or collectibles, you do see a lot of similar things. A 52 Topps mantle, a maze or whatever. You see a lot of similar items, but this Jeff Jacob collection, especially Hakes in general, but especially that Jeff Jacob stuff is insane. All the unique stuff that comes through.
Well, and it's not like he has that much in his collection that's a one of a kind for that item, but the condition certainly is unrivaled in many cases. So, we saw some basic figures that it was very tough for us to do estimates because there were very few prices in this higher grade. So we were going by maybe a step below, and maybe we adjusted a little bit. And in some cases, things brought 3, 4, 5 times what just one grade below would. So yeah, that's a testament to Jeff not only having the eye to get all of these different variations. Some, the minutia on some of this is ridiculous, how small the variations are. He got them all. And then on top of that, he kept upgrading and getting the best of the best. So the collection that he put together, and I've said this before, I've seen many collections over my 40 years at Hakes. I've never seen any better than his as far as how deep it was, how complete it was, the condition. It really is just an amazing collection. So for us to have the privilege to offer it is it's a real treat.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And you could tell too that there were a lot of collectors, most of it being Star Wars action figure sealed stuff. You could tell there was a lot of collectors that saved. They were ready for that auction. And it's only just a piece of it, right? I think it was like a few hundred items of a couple thousand in total. Isn't that right?
This is 400 items of about 3,000. So the game plan, at least for this year, is probably have 3, and that was a cataloged auction, a special standalone catalog. So probably 3 cataloged auctions of his items. We'll see what's left. We'll see where we go. Certainly May is going to be the next. That will be part 2 of the cataloged auction, also around 400 lots. As many items as it was, we were very kind of controlled, and the nod goes to Kelly, our consignment director, and who landed his collection. Very controlled in how we offered this. So there might have been, of the 400, 300 Star Wars items, but there were so many of the first film 12 back, and then so many Empire and so many Jedi and so many Power of the Force. We didn't just overload anything, so that if you're a collector of just one certain segment of Star Wars, you weren't overwhelmed. Even if you were a collector of everything, there was a smaller amount to pick and choose, rather than what we could have done is put 3,000 items out there at one time, which would have been insane, but that's been done before by other auction companies, and that's just not our MO.
Yeah, yeah, man, it was really something special. Well, I'm excited to see kind of those as those roll out, all the different items. We do have a few sealed Star Wars that we're going to talk about tonight. But yeah, so that was incredible. Let's start with your collecting history. You know, you had mentioned 40 years at Hakes, and clearly you are still a collector. How did this start for you going back in time? And obviously you've got, I know it's got to be a high stress job running Hakes. It's, you know, you've got timelines and all that stuff, but you're living the dream too. You know, I mean, you're kind of, you know, you're working in an industry that you clearly love. So how did that all start?
Yeah. So at birth, pretty simple. I mean, I just kind of collected things, even, you know, toys and so forth as a kid. Always saved the packaging, the boxes, the inserts. I don't know. I'm just born with that gene. And then about 8 years old, I got my first stack of comic books hand me down from a friend. And then I was just down that rabbit hole. So I just became a rabid comic book reader and collector. Then I started, and well, I should backtrack. My next door neighbor was a major collector. And if you walked in his house, it was like a museum. He had showcases of lead soldiers and mason jars and tokens, and just it was incredible. And so as a young kid, I was exposed to that. And then as I'm collecting too, it just seemed kind of natural to just keep acquiring things. So comic books led to me looking for superhero toys and things. And at this time, one of the friends of my next door neighbor, who was also a collector and was the shipping manager at Hakes, wanted some help doing toy shows in his co-op and flea markets and things. So that's when it started as a profession, you know, under the table. I wasn't 16. I was kind of just doing this on the side on weekends or whatever. But then that exposed me to even more items, but also the world of collectibles in the context of, you know, buying and selling and not just acquiring myself. So a couple years of doing that. And he said, I need some help in the shipping department at Hakes. Are you open to that? So I said, sure. And I had a trial run. Then I turned 16 and Ted offered me a job. And that was 1985. And that was 40 years ago.
Wow. That's wild. Now, going back in time was because you made me think 1985. You know, we're going to look at one item here, you know, it's the Optimus Prime sealed, you know, Transformers. I think it came out in 84 or 86, one of those years.
84,
but
yep.
I know that Hakes is well known, especially another item we're going to cover too, political items and political buttons and those sorts of things. Did you have that sort of stuff, like some of those 80s type toys back then, or was that had not hit the nostalgia? Like that was too new, right? At that point?
No. I didn't do Transformers, but I was buying Superpowers and Secret Wars. Again, things that were, you know, in the comic book world. But I had friends. In fact, the person I mentioned, Dick Stegemeyer, who got me my job at Hakes, he was going to Toys R Us and he liked action figures and he would just buy one of every action figure. So he was doing that. You know, and we talk about Star Wars. That really was the first property where people did this, in that not only did kids buy this, adults bought this because they loved the movie. So the kids bought it and played with it. Adults bought it and saved it. So that's why you see so many carded figures that remain. So much of that was bought and put away back then. Not that they thought it was going to be worth something, but that they liked it, right? So that's where that whole thing started. And then, you know, now we have all these limited edition and collector's items and so forth that are coming out that are made as instant collectibles. Back then, that was sort of the instant collectible for adults. Was they were buying these toys, you know, in many cases buying one for themselves and giving one to their kid.
Wow. Yeah.
But to your point on political, yes, that's how Hake started in 1967. So this is 58 years. And that was Ted's forte. But, you know, just like me, at the same time as he's buying political buttons in collection, here's comic character items and here's sports items. And so after the first couple of years, it slowly turned into what it is now. And that is, we offer a little bit of any and everything in the world of pop culture and in Americana. It's all encompassing. And that's what keeps it interesting and exciting, is that any day, not only can anything show up, but we have so many different categories that it really is, you know, wide spanning of the kind of shock value that it could have. Just like today, something came across in an email from a regular consignor that we have never had, that I never saw, that I didn't even know exist. And I call a couple people into my office and say, hey, look at this. And we kind of geek out like kids, right? So yeah. You mentioned high stress. Yes, there's high stress that comes with this of just auction after auction and where the item's coming from. But when you have moments like that, it makes it all worthwhile that, we're seeing this stuff that we all love. And even if it's an area that I may not be the biggest fan of, to see items that we haven't offered before, I still find that fascinating and interesting. And that's just all of a love of the collectibles and approaching this as we do from a historical aspect of documenting these items and, finding new homes for them and so forth. I know there's a big thing in the industry right now is what's the next $1 million item and all these big ticket things. And that catches worldwide attention, but for many people for a moment and it's gone, as opposed to those that collect because they love this stuff. There's some intrinsic value. That's the real kind of spirit and mantra of Hakes is love what you collect and collect what you love.
Yeah. And the one thing I really like about your auction house in particular is I can find kind of on that main homepage where you're browsing the auction, there's all the different categories. And there's a lot of categories where I'm like, what? There's this. And I look into it. There's vintage Disney. I almost bid on a vintage Disney item, which I don't own any vintage Disney stuff, but I read the description. I was just like, wow, that is really cool. So it's always an education for me, each auction, looking at just different collectibles, different categories, and also seeing price points and realizing that some people pay up huge for certain items. Those political items, the buttons, it's wild. I mean, they can range all over the place. We'll talk about one tonight. But yeah, I really like the variety there, and I always learn something. Your vinyl collection back there, are you adding to that? Is that something that you're, constantly adding to, or are there rare pieces you're still looking for, or is that kind of like you've been doing it, that's pretty much set there?
No. No, and you can see it's full. So I'm working on ways to make up, free up room here. No, music has always been my number one love. And then it's funny because in 1980, while I had some comic books prior to that, like I said, they were hand-me-downs or I bought them off the rack and didn't really pay attention. But in 1980, New Teen Titans #1 came out, and I happened to be in a bookstore at that time, and something just clicked. And then that was the first book that every month I went back and got. And then I started getting other monthlies. But also 1980, Back in Black came out, and that's the first piece of recorded music that I ever owned. So from that point forward, that was on a cassette. I got into vinyl when I got my first turntable at 16 in 1985. And so that was about 7,000 records ago. And then on top of that, I have about 7,000 CDs, throw in some 8-tracks and cassettes and reel to reel. I've got about 15,000 albums, but my main focus is vinyl. It was in the 80s, then vinyl went away and I switched to CDs. And then around 2000, I got back into vinyl as that started to come back. So in the last 25 years, I've really focused on my vinyl collection and have expanded it. But I do that on a weekly basis. I've got multiple record stores in the area that I go to once a week. And I'm disappointed if I go there and I leave empty-handed.
Wow. That's really cool. Is it because there's things that pop up that you just haven't seen before, or is it kind of like you take your time with it? Like you're not buying everything in one shot and you just kind of enjoying it as you go?
Yeah. And I'm very, I'm a condition freak. So, and not just the record, but the cover as well, or if it had inserts and inner sleeve. So there are records that I'll see time and time again that just don't cut it condition wise and I'll pass. So that's always going to be out there. But I collect, there are artists where I will collect an entire catalog. Even though I know some of those records are not so great, I still fill in that collection. I'm always buying stuff that I'm just intrigued with, whether it's who produced it, or maybe it's a guest musician I'm a fan of, or simply I like the album cover. So I get as much enjoyment out of picking up something that I really have no idea what it's going to sound like. And rarely am I disappointed because I listen to every style of music there is. So I'm not that fussy when I'm playing a certain style of music. As long as it sounds good to me, I'm good with it. But yeah, it's the hunt of not just looking for those records that are on my want list, but things that I'll come across that I just had no idea that I ever would buy or have an interest in. And so a $5 record to me is maybe more important than a $500 rarity that I get that I finally add to my collection.
I gotcha. Very cool. Very cool. Well, that sounds like you're going to be doing that forever. That sounds like kind of an endless deal,
Yeah.
which is awesome. All right. Well, let's dive in. We've handpicked some really cool items. And frankly, I'm going to start off with the one that's on the cover. On the cover of the catalog. I just got it in the mail this morning. I was pumped as I was going through this thing. Let me pull this up. So one thing about this auction that I noticed right out of the gate is there is quite a bit of original art in this auction. And let's start with one in particular, and we'll play a little promo video here that you guys did. It's the Star Wars #1. It's page 16, original art by Howard Chaykin.
Any attack made by the rebels against this station would be a useless gesture, no matter what technical data they've obtained. This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
Don't try to frighten us with your sorcerer's ways, Lord Vader. Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fort.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
We're doomed. You think they'll melt us down?
And if you look here, this is the cover, Star Wars #1, of course, the classic. I used to have this book. I think I had it in an 8.5, a CGC 8.5. I ended up selling it kind of during the spike. And I was always thinking, you know what, I'm going to go back and get that book in a higher grade at some point. I haven't yet. But that is just such an all-time comic book going back to 1977.
Yeah. So here's an example of, I did have this. In my local grocery store, they actually sold the first 4 issues in a poly bag.
Oh, okay.
So I bought those, and actually issue #1 was on the stands before the movie came out, which is an anomaly. And the first 6 issues of this series are the adaptation of the movie with art by Howard Chaykin. Art from those 6 issues rarely turn up. We've had a handful of pages. I think under a dozen is a good number to say that have ever surfaced or come to auction. So this auction, we actually have 5 pages from the 6-issue adaptation, plus 3 covers from the UK version of Star Wars. So it's in this one auction, we have more pieces at one time than most other auction houses ever had altogether. This was a really, really rare find, all from one person, a fan of Howard's artwork. Just happened to, get the right pages too, because getting pages from Star Wars is, like I said, pretty incredible. So to have what they acquired, and then to have this page, which is from the very first issue with a pivotal movie scene featuring Darth Vader. We also have the Sandcrawler, R2-D2, C-3PO, all on this one page. It's amazing. It's interesting to match up the comic with the movie because some of the dialogue is identical, some is altered, and there are some points in the comic that never were in the movie and actually kind of alter the movie history, so to speak. So anyone that's a Star Wars fan that has never read these first 6 issues, and you can get them, they've been collected in trade paperbacks, I urge you to read it and kind of do a comparison of film to comic.
Wow, that is wild. I have noticed too, especially with Marvel and DC stuff, it feels like original art has gone absolutely bonkers. Now, I'm sure that it probably has always been popular. I don't think it's a brand new thing that original art from these things is brand new to being popular, but it does feel like over the last couple of years, there's been a movement, over to just more people kind of finding this and really getting into it more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it started with comic books, and comic books really started to take off, and then people started to take notice and more interest in original art. I mean, you can talk to anybody who was at a comic convention in the 70s. There were stacks and stacks of incredible art, golden and silver age art on tables for not much money. I mean, we once sold a Fantastic Four cover by Kirby, and a Superman cover by Swan for about 100,000 each. That person bought both of those for about 200 for the pair at a convention in the 70s. That's just, what the prices were. Now everything was less too, comics and so forth, but even Golden and Silver Age comics in the 70s were taking off. But yeah, it's been the last, certainly 10 years that art has really exploded. The last few, we've seen some incredible prices for art. And the important thing is, remember, is it's all one of a kind, right? So there might be 24 pages to a comic book, but every single page is going to be a unique piece of art. And so, yeah, if you want a part of comic book history, you want a one-of-a-kind item, original comic book art is the way to go. It's another area that I personally collect and love. And it's on our price ranges. And we're talking about pages that were 100,000, and there's some pages and covers have sold in the millions. But you can build a very nice comic book art collection and spend hundreds or low thousands if you want, and still get some really great one-of-a-kind items.
Yeah, and I wonder too, I'm curious your thoughts on this. I feel like, I wonder how many of the original art folks are comic book collectors that maybe, you get to a point, especially if you're kind of a high roller and you're spending serious money on graded comic books, but it reaches a stage, especially like Silver Age, for example, if you're just looking at 60s stuff, unless you're getting it in a 9.8 or something, you kind of run, it's all condition based. Whereas exactly what you said there, they're all one of ones, each page is a one of one. So they're the only ones that own that one. Whereas if you buy, Incredible Hulk #1 or something, and it's a 7.0, there's not tons of them out there, but it's not a one of a kind like the art is. Yeah. I wonder if that's part of it.
Sure. Yeah. And, we have plenty of art collectors that don't collect comic books. They certainly read comic books. They like the artwork, but to them, this is what they want because it's unique, and they don't really care about collecting comics.
Yeah, that's interesting. It could be completely different buyers too. All right, let's move over. We were talking about this earlier. It is, I might actually bid on this just because I don't have any of the sealed Transformer stuff. And this is just such a classic going back to the 80s. This is like peak 80s nostalgia right here. And I know this is not a mega rare item, but every time I see these, I don't know what it is about it, but I just get, it just brings back memories, these old Transformers.
Yeah, and, Optimus Prime, one of the most popular and major characters in the line. It is Series 1. Now, it is, while it's an AFA 80 plus near mint, it is a Q. It is a qualified, which means the tape is either loose or has been cut on the side, right? These were, unlike a blister where it's just the blister that seals the figure to the card, the boxes were sealed by these pieces of tape on the side panels that easily dried, flaked off, or someone cut them. And so, but a qualified grade means nothing was disturbed inside, so it wasn't removed and played with. So it is essentially still original issue, old store stock, but it's just not sealed on the side. So believe it or not, it takes it to an incredible level. We're talking about Jeff Jacob jump in value if those tape strips are still there. So again, having said that, still a key piece. It's
how many do you see? Is it typical that it's like this where you don't have the tape, or is it like, like how rare is it to have the tape there? Because I would think, after 40 years or 40 plus years, that tape is gone.
It is. It's getting harder and harder to find examples like that. Yes, it just depends on, and the same piece of tape used in the same way sometimes didn't have the same effect in the end, depending on how it was stored or whatever. So, but collectors prefer the seal, even though the contents weren't touched. They prefer to seal because that's just higher grade, right? And Transformers have taken off now. Jeff does have some Transformers in this collection, and we saw some good prices in January, but his collection is primarily Star Wars. However, if you are into Transformers, Kelly just got in the last week, took a trip to get them to Indiana. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 175 80s Transformers with some really, really rare examples, things that we've never had before. So that's now all being in the process of going to AFA and getting graded. Some we hope will be back in time for the July auction. If not, it'll be November. But anyway, if you're into Transformers, stay tuned in 2025 because we have a lot coming in the near future.
Good to know. All right, good to know. I'm going to be thinking about that for July. All right, this one kind of hit me in the feels because this goes back to, early 90s, my childhood. I was 10, 11, 12 years old here. And we're looking at the Playmates. These are the Slam Duncan Donatello Ninja Turtle figure, but this looks to be a prototype, which you definitely don't see every day. Alex, how'd you guys get this?
This was another one that, again, I put this all on Kelly. He's been doing an incredible job the last 10 years or so since we started really ramping up our game with action figures. It all started with the Russell Brand Star Wars collection. It snowballed into what we have now, and we build ourselves, and we are known as the #1 action figure auction house in the world. And that alone is bringing this material to us. Everyone has seen the prices we're getting. So this, and there's a variety of prototypes and original card art and so forth for the Turtles this time. I liken it to what I mentioned, the Star Wars offering that's sort of unique to an auction. What we have in this time in just a dozen items or so is the most amazing Turtle prototype pre-production items ever offered. This is exceptionally nice. It's a hard copy, so it's an actual copy of the sculpting, but with a material that is solid and heavier.
Okay.
But it is a 1-to-1, so this is the actual size. This is how it this is the final stage before they produce it, and so hand painted and all of that. And like I said, anything Turtle prototype is highly desirable and rarely comes up. So what we have this time is incredible. This being the key piece.
Yeah, the one thing I noticed about some of the other prototypes that you have, it looks like they're just the mold, like the mold that was used, which are cool. I mean, they're cool, definitely. But when I saw this one, I was like, this is interesting because they've obviously completed it as some sort of a showcase.
Yeah, there's various, when you get into prototypes, there's various prototypes in pre-production, and there are multiple steps along the way with packaging, with the figures and so forth. And some of the more bland, plain looking, as you mentioned, are not as rare or as desirable as something like this, which really was this, a step before. They took the time, they hand painted, they mocked it up, and this would have been used at and was used at toy fairs and things of that nature to give everyone an idea of here's how it's going to be, and then he put it in production. There were times where things went to a toy fair or a trade show and the reception was not great, and that line never got made. So it was, just kind of show everyone what could be. And obviously the Turtles were popular by this time. So, the variations in the different series that they did, sports, and they did them as monsters and on and on and on. I mean, if you're a Turtles collector, it's much like Star Wars. If you want a complete collection, you have a lot of action figures that you're going to be adding.
Yeah, and this one it says here, one of only 5 known of these prototypes. And I think for sports, as a lot of sports card people watch the channel, it's got the Jordan jersey. So this has got some sports relevance to it. The GOAT of basketball, of course.
And that was not by mistake. It's 23 for a reason. This was a nod to Jordan for sure.
Yeah, that is a sweet piece. All right, we're gonna switch over here. This was something I was trying to figure out. I think it falls along again the art side, but you'll have to explain this one to me. This was the Aurora Incredible Hulk model kit box lid, and I know Neil Adams is huge. As far as is that why this is such a huge item? Because it's Neil Adams.
That certainly helps, but as you see on that screenshot there of the video we did, we have 2 pieces from the 66 Aurora models, the Hulk and the Captain America. A lot of the Aurora art for the monster models, all the models, it's known who did it. Adams is known to have done this. The Captain America, we don't know who did it. So this being Adams absolutely adds another element to it. Now Adams collectors and comic book collectors are going to gravitate to it. Having said that, Captain America is just impressive, and both of these are still highly coveted by Aurora model kit collectors. And model kit collectors are serious, and they love the original art. You know, there was not a lot of it. There were, you know, for superheroes, a handful of figural models for both Marvel and DC were made. It wasn't like the monsters where there were more characters made. So very small amount of original art. And you do see some of the art turn up from the 70s reissues. This coming to auction is really, really special. And the fact that we have two from the original Aurora Marvel series is pretty incredible. The only other one they did was Spider-Man. Those were the three characters they did as a Aurora model in the 60s.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's already at $6,000. We got 15 days left. Yeah, that's interesting because this is where I learned, because this is not on my radar. As you know, you mentioned people are collecting the model kits, and that was not on my radar at all. You know, Marvel, you know, style model kits. That's really interesting.
And this comes from a serious collector who is offering up a few things, who's had this forever, and I could see this going into a collection and staying there for a long time. This is not something that is going to trade hands often because of how special it is.
Yeah, that is amazing. All right. We're going to shift back over. I know we were talking Star Wars earlier. We're going to go to a biggie. There's a biggie in this auction. It is the Luke Skywalker. It is the 12-back AFA 85 near mint, the double telescoping Pop 3. What is it about it's the double telescoping that's always the more rare one, right? With these?
Right. So it was very early in the production run. Okay. They did three figures like this early on, and that was Luke and Ben and Vader.
And Vader, yeah.
Luke there are more of, because that was part of what is called the early bird kit. So in 77, Star Wars comes out. It's a huge hit. Merchandise hits the stands right away. Like I said, the comic was even on the racks before the movie. Topps had the cards out right away. Kenner could not get the action figures made fast enough. So Christmas of 77, there are no Kenner toys on the shelves, no action figures. What they did was you could get a big cardboard envelope that was your early bird kit that had a certificate, stickers, a cardboard stand, and that you could mail away then and get the early bird kit, which was Chewbacca, Princess, Luke, R2-D2. You got those four figures mailed to you. They were the first figures to ever get in kids' hands, but in this generic cardboard box. Then in early 78 is when the figures hit the stands. In that short term, Kenner decides that this what they call double telescoping, so the lightsaber can pull out and extend to a longer length. Yeah, that kind of became, it shows you there, it became a production issue. It was more costly, and so they said, let's scrap that and just it's stationary. So a small amount outside of the early bird kit made it onto cards. As I said, very few Vader and Ben Kenobi, as we saw last auction, or Jeff Jacob auction, we got $100,000 for Ben Kenobi on the card. We have a Vader DT on the card coming up in May. That's our key piece there. We've had a handful of Lukes, but this is an exceptional grade as an 85 near mint plus. So that's the selling point. It is rare. I don't want to downplay it. It's not rare. It's just not as rare as Ben and Vader, which both are a dozen or so known graded. So there's a handful more of Luke, but not in this grade. There are very few ever obtained this high grade. So you're getting a rare figure and a high grade, and that's sort of a perfect storm for this figure.
Are they? Yeah, there's so few of them. Does it matter if it's unpunched or not, or most of them unpunched? Or does it vary?
It varies, and some collectors really want that unpunched. Others don't care. Some don't want them with a sticker. Some don't care if it has a store sticker. This is unpunched, no sticker, and it has what's called a SKU or SKU on the footer. So that is a stock keeping unit. That was a way for stores to track sales. So again, when I talk about minutia of action figures, this is one that has that subtle difference, and so that takes it to another level because that makes it a rare version of the figure. So it's all these little differences that if you want to go down that rabbit hole, look out. But this is something that Jeff Jacob, not that this is a Jeff Jacob example, because there are no Jeff Jacob in this auction, but that's kind of a Jeff Jacob mentality of I want one of every one, even if the serial number is different.
Yeah. That you actually raise a good point. All the little details, all the little nuance with these action figures, just little slight things that make such a difference. People will pay a premium for. That's just wild, unbelievable. All right, we're gonna go the next thing. I almost want to sell off pieces of my collection to get this next one. I know I'm building it up here, but this next one is been on the bucket list. This is kind of one of those where it's like I'll never achieve it, but maybe I could if I could sell things and achieve this. But this is kind of one of those, again, if I'm going back to my childhood, Ninja Turtles was a big part of my childhood, the action figures, not necessarily the comic book, because the comic book came out, what was it, 84 when it came out, the first one?
Yes.
Was it 84? Yeah, 84. So it was a little bit before my time. So this comic book was not necessarily on my radar as a kid. The action figures were, but as now I collect graded comic books, and this is an absolute beast of a book. Of course, it's the origin and first appearance of the Ninja Turtles. It's in a 9.2 white pages. The first print is so, not impossible to find, but especially kind of in a higher grade. I mean, this is a heck of a book.
Yeah. So this is the key to this. It's a first print. So this went through multiple printings, but first print is the most desirable. First print is also difficult to obtain because at the time they did just 3,000 copies. So that was not many, but it was,
I didn't realize 3,000.
Yeah, it's just 3,000. It was, kind of that black and white independent thing was in its infancy. This is the book that really launched that whole genre throughout the 80s. But this had a small print run, and it became a big success. Then it did multiple prints, and then of course it took off and became, the mega property that it is when it branched into the action figures and so on and so forth. At the beginning, though, nobody really knew what this book was going to do, and then it had all kind of spin-offs and radioactive black belt hamsters and on and on and on. They had so it's a pretty iconic moment in pop culture history when this hit the stands.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out is, in the 80s, we all know a lot of the stuff, it wasn't rare. They printed a ton of it. But as you said, because it's the first print, there's only a few thousand copies, which in the 80s, when you think about 80s and 90s, when you think about, the mass production of a lot of these things, 3,000 copies is insanely low. And then when you get one that's got white pages, it's a really tough grade because of that black cover. It's brutal.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yeah.
A 9.2, you'd think, well, that's not such a big deal in the world where we're looking at books that they're 9.6 and 9.8 and so forth. No, there are higher grades out there than this, but a 9.2 for this book with exactly what you said, that black border, that is not easy to get. Anything a 9 and above, really.
It's brutal. I'm going to watch this. It's out. I'd have to move some things around, but I might have to make a play on this. This is such a great book. We'll see what happens with it, but
just talking about the whole process of things. This was something that came in the very last minute. I mean, we were about to number the comic book section when this all happened. So, and when something like that does come up, if there's time, we have to kind of stop what we're doing and make it work. Or, if it's going to be in a regular catalog, you got another 3-4 month cycle that you may not want to wait. The consignor may not want to wait. So we were happy to get this last minute.
Absolutely. That's a heck of a book. Well, I'll keep my eye on it. We'll see what happens. All right. This next one is way outside of my zone. I wanted to learn something from you, but this is kind of the bread and butter for Hakes going back in time. And it is this presidential pin. And this is a Bryan and Stevenson eclipsing McKinley and Roosevelt. Outstanding. It's from 1900. Is that correct? It's a presidential pin, or is it leading up
1900? Yes. Presidential campaign button. And look, this is outside of my wheelhouse too, even though I've been at Hakes forever. The one area I really never gravitated to as a collector or kind of learning was political, because that's the founder, Ted Hake. That was his thing. That's still his thing. Yeah. He's the master. He wrote the Bible on this whole collecting genre. So but again, not to say I don't have an interest, and I see things and say that's nice, but I don't know the history. I never got into this. I'm not the person that takes consignments on this. Scott Muscle is our Americana director and specialist, and kind of was handpicked by Ted to come in and help him and transition into the role of the political guru. So I will go to the glasses, and I will quote what Scott wrote, which is important, that he says that this is a special opportunity for the advanced collector or those seeking the most fascinating and special artifacts of the material culture of American political campaigning. So this really is one of the key political buttons of all eras. They did different riffs on this. Most you see are sepia tone. This really stands out as being color. So if you want to learn more, go and read the description. Scott does a fantastic job on describing all the political items. He and Andrew do that section, and they put a lot of time, especially Scott, into the research and the wording of these things, because these are museum quality historical artifacts.
That's what I was going to say. It's a piece of U.S. history, really. I would think the collectors for this, they're antique collectors and American pop culture, American history collectors, all kind of bound up into one. Honestly, it's kind of similar to pre-war baseball cards. It's pre-war baseball cards. It's, none of the people collecting those saw any of these people play baseball. A lot of it is just the importance of the game of baseball and what it meant in American history, let alone in sports history and everything else. So I can understand.
That's a great point in that who cares about this stuff still, because there are some things that are older collectibles, early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s. There are some characters and some different toys and things that are generational, and we're losing collectors, and there aren't new collectors coming in for this material because this is historical. This is like, Babe Ruth and Cy Young and Honus Wagner. These are figures that are always going to be relevant as long as there's a game of baseball, as long as people are interested in politics and American history. These names are going to always be around. People are going to be familiar with them. And it is, sort of a different thing of collecting that maybe you didn't grow up as a child with Star Wars toys and you want to, reclaim your youth. Here you are investing in and collecting history that you didn't have to be a part of then, but you want to be now.
Absolutely. Speaking of baseball, not necessarily pre-war, but we do have a really cool card I wanted to pull up here. The Sandy Koufax from 1961? Yeah, 61 tops, and it's signed. This is something, of course, we've been talking about, how this has really caught on here over the last few years is, a lot of these, retired ball players, autograph cards, people collecting not necessarily high grade of the card, but trying to get good autos, good looking autos. And this is a really unique item.
Yeah. And, for a while, the signed cards, people would turn their nose up to, right? Somebody wrote on this card, we don't like that. But that has changed. And especially now that we have third party grading companies also authenticating and encapsulating, and so you get a nice little package of all-in-one collectible of a card and a signature. And this is from a collection that we have talked about before, where this was a very early person in the going to conventions and old-timer shows and so forth and getting things signed. So he was doing this really at the formation of all of those, and that's why you see we have a number of Rubmar cards and other cards that you typically don't see signed, and he had multiples of those because he was doing this very early on. So Koufax was one of his favorites as well. We've had a number of Koufax signed cards. The one thing that this collector did is he never got the same card signed twice. So in his collection, while he might have had multiple cards or multiple signatures of players, it was always on a different card.
Yeah, I think these are really unique. I know that, there, as you mentioned, there's other Sandy Koufax signed cards, but he signed a bunch of different cards. It's not as if he signed, in today's world with baseball, you have these new prospects that come out and they have to sign 10 million cards for tops. Sandy doesn't have, any pack pulled autos, going back in time. So these are really unique pieces. I almost didn't want to show this one because I'm probably going to bid on. This is another one I'm going to bid on. We'll switch over here to graded comic books here. X-Men. We've got the new X-Men. They're coming out. The Marvel Universe is bringing back the X-Men. It's happening. And we've got a really important book here. This one is on my radar. It is X-Men #4. First Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, Toad, and first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Plus the cover on this one is so cool with Magneto and the gang.
Yeah, and second appearance of Magneto. And, just months after it debuted in 1963, this title. So, yeah, a very important book. And if people are fans of X-Men and know the history, at one point, sales of X-Men, unlike Spider-Man and Iron Man and Daredevil and Avengers, Thor, it was light. It was not a popular book. It went through a series of having books reprinted rather than new issues. It almost was canceled. Giant Size X-Men comes out, changes things. But there was a period where the X-Men were, not what they are now, much like Seinfeld. Seinfeld was almost canceled, and then it becomes one of the most popular shows of all time. X-Men's almost canceled. Turn the corner without running into somebody that's wearing an X-Men shirt these days, right? And yeah, this is just a key early book with major first appearances, and Stanley's story, of course, as he wrote so much back then, and Jack Kirby art. So a lot going for it.
And of course, it's a time capsule. You look back at the back cover here from 1964. You can make $5 to $20 a week extra by owning your own Saturday morning shoe store. And they'll even provide you a free selling outfit, it says down here. You can send this in to them. I mean, even that in itself, it just shows you, how times change. It's wild. Because I just thought this one was really cool. Another one that's on my radar here. I never owned this as a kid, but this was one I remember. Like, I had a couple of buddies that had the Imperial Shuttle, and you guys have, you got to love the box art here too, because it's so, it's lined up with the movie and everything. I mean, they really did a good job with the box art.
Yeah, classic, and one of the bigger ships. As a kid, I had the first wave of action figures. I got into Empire a little bit. By the time Return of the Jedi came out, I was older and out of toys. I was in this skateboards and music, and so this was not something that I had as a kid, as opposed to the first two movies. But there were a lot of people where this was their entry point, right? These were the first toys they had, were Return of the Jedi. So I go back to my Russell Branton, where there may be some people that only collect Jedi because that was their first movie. That is possibly their favorite movie. They just want to be selective and go with Jedi, or you collect all Star Wars in general. Either way, this is on your top list because it is a key vehicle. It was more expensive, like some of these other bigger things from Masters Universe and G.I. Joe and so forth. The bigger vehicles sold less because they were more expensive. So there are less of those out there. This is one that is sealed. This is one that is an AFA 85 near mint, so high grade. So again, one of those things that has a lot, lined up. Yeah.
It's got the tape. It's holding on. It's hanging on.
Yeah. Well, this was a lot different. This was wide, thick tape that really stuck. Now, that's not to say I haven't seen things like this yellow, but this is more secure. The Transformers, it really was just a little strip of tape on each side. So it was first of all, it was meant to be opened up the day you bought it. It certainly wasn't meant to stay sealed all these years later. So that really is why that commands a premium, in that these things weren't meant to be in this state.
I like here too, you've got, according to the AFA Pop Report, only 3 examples graded higher. Again, the one thing I really like about these, there's not tons of these. And, how many are they going to find? I mean, it's not impossible. The 80s is not that long ago. I know that, it could happen, but, how many people really kept these things sealed, over time? I mean, everybody opened these, other than, I know it's probably a lot more common, I would think, for people to have held on to the individual action figures, as you mentioned, Star Wars. But the idea that you're going to hold on to a giant vehicle over time, I mean, that's probably, I would assume that's less common.
Less common. Yeah, it really was the figures that people were buying. I'm not to say that people weren't buying other things as well, but by and large, the collectors back then, or the fans back then, were buying the figures. They were cheaper. They were easier to store, display if you wanted. That's a point on the ship, is even from day one, to get an 85 just because of the size and getting moved around on the shelves and so forth. So if this is an 80, different story, still nice to have it sealed and so forth. But that 85 is just really takes it to another level.
Well, Alex, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your collecting journey again. You've been on now for a while. I appreciate you always coming on, and these auctions are so fun for me to go through. I could honestly go for hours. I could go through each of these. Every time these hit, I spend literally a couple of hours going through each category for the most part and just taking a look at what it is. For those of you out there that are just learning collectibles, or maybe you're a sports card person and you want to just kind of take a look at some other categories, Hakes is where you want to do that. Hakes is an education every time a new auction pops up. So definitely check it out. We've got about 15 days left on this one. So there is still time, but make sure you head out to Hakes, check it out, because there's so many unique items every time, but especially in this one.
Ends March 25th and 26th. 25th is the historical and sports memorabilia. 26th is the entertainment, the comics, action figures. So yeah, Hakes.com. And I appreciate what you have to say, because we do take a lot of time and great pride in presenting the things the way we do. And we have many people that say the same thing, is they'll read that catalog or look over the online listing front to back just for entertainment purposes, right?
Yeah, and also to that, there are price points for everybody too. You know, a lot of times you go into a big auction house, everything it feels like is very expensive. You can get really cool items without spending, $1 zillion on Hakes. Of course, they've got some high-end items, but there's a lot of really affordable collectibles that are amazing. So that's my plug. I can't say enough about Hakes. Alex, thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate it, buddy. And we will be back again next time.
Appreciate being here.
All right, we'll see you next time.